Okay, so this is a 5-year update of 1999 Silverado that I got from my father-in-law, who really took care of this truck. Washed it every week, washed it underneath all the salt, because this was driven in Michigan. And that's the reason this truck is still so solid, because most of them are been scrapped long time ago. Now this was a project. I spent countless of hours trying to remove all the rust from the frame. I didn't do much on the body of the truck. I mainly just coated that with oil. But the frame, especially the rear frame, when I took the bed off the truck, I mean, I went down to clean metal with all kinds of tools. I think I spent 50-60 hours cleaning this truck up before applying all the rust proofing. Especially the inside of the frame. There's tubes that connect to frame rails on both sides. These tubes were just impossible to clean on the inside. I used a weight attached to like a cable and a power drill to just whip it around, try to knock all the loose rust. I used crowbars. I was trying all kinds of things. The shiny spots on these tubes are where the original GM coating was still on them, and it kind of still protected the tubes. That's why you see the nice and clean metal. Now for the base coat, I use, actually 3 coats, I use Chassis Saver, which is same as POR 15, except they claim that it's even better. Now when I applied this thing, it just was beautiful. It was glossy black, it was tough, I couldn't scratch it off. I mean, this thing is tough as nails. Once you apply it, I mean, you can take a hammer or a screwdriver, you can't remove this stuff. It just adheres so well to any metal or even rusty metal. I also applied 2 coats on the underside of the bed. On the round frame tubes, I used the Eastwood internal frame coating, which is a spray with zinc that you spray over rust. And it comes with a little thin tube that you're supposed to shove in the frame, but it was way too flexible. I actually had to use a PVC pipe and shove their tube inside of that to try to get in deep inside of those tubes. And I had a really good coating. Okay guys, so this is 24 hours later. It's all dried up, and you can see on the inside every single tube. I got it everywhere, 100% coverage. See, the issue is, as you can see from the video, as I was spraying this thing, it comes in 4 jets like that, just like you see in here, the spot. So when you go in, and if you go straight up and down, all you're gonna have is 4 spots painted. So you have to spin the nozzle around, and that's what I was doing as I was shoving in and out, especially on a second coat, because I put 2 coats on this thing. I was spinning the nozzle constantly to make sure I get full coverage, and you can see, I'll show you from both sides, all tubing. Every tube, well, this one you can't see far because it's got the bend in there. So is this one, same thing, it's got a bend in it, but it's I got 100% coverage except the edges. And I couldn't come out all the way to the edges because, as you can see, what happens, it was spraying my frame on the outside. So I have some of the spots here on the edges and on the other side where I didn't cover really well. So I'm going to use Chassis Saver. Sorry for the light. I'm going to use Chassis Saver to cover these spots, and then I'm going to use rubberized undercoating here to kind of cover the green stuff to make it pretty. Not that it matters, it's just the frame. So here's the other side of the bend tube at the end. And like I said, this stuff was dripping out here everywhere, out of all the holes. This stuff is it's just, I don't know if you can see underneath, it was pouring out of every hole, which is fine. And I used up 3 cans and I did 2 coats. On the rear axle and the differential, a pumpkin, and the differential cover, I used again 3 coats of Chassis Saver, and then I used the 3M rubberized spray. I just wanted to try 2 different things. I had a Rust-Oleum rubberized coating, but I figured one part, well, I'll try something different, so I used the 3M rubberized coating. Okay, the Rust-Oleum rubberized undercoating, make sure you steer this thing up, because the bottom, 1/3 of the can is almost solid. So here's a list of 7 different applications I applied to this truck to stop the rust, to see how they perform over 5 years. So for 5 years I did not touch anything, no touch-ups, nothing. So the first product was the Eastwood internal frame coating, which was actually the worst. Out of all 7 products I applied, this one was the one that failed first. Basically within a year I started seeing rust all on the inside. It was orange water coming out every time it would rain. Within I would say 1.5 years, it was the inside of the tubes were just completely corroded. I think that's the application of it. It's impossible to clean all the rust on the inside of the tubes. But this technically, it's a product you're supposed to spray over rust, and it's supposed to seal it, convert it, and keep it from rusting. It definitely didn't do that. I mean, I had rust, like I said, within a year it was just all rusty on the inside. This was the first failure of all 7 products that I tried. So I definitely cannot recommend Eastwood internal frame coating. Maybe they changed the formula, maybe I did something wrong. Like I said, there was no way to clean it. Now, next product is the 3 coats of chassis saver and then 2 coats of Rust-Oleum rubberized undercoating. This performed pretty well. The first 3 years I really didn't see any rust, any bubbles, any spots, anything. Frame just looked beautiful, black. Now, this was driven in salt, so I was actually hoping, wow, this is a really good product. Chassis saver with undercoating, rubberized undercoating, really performed well. But then the last 2 years I started seeing spots. First, a year ago I saw maybe like a dozen spots, and now probably 50-60 spots. They're just basically bubbles. As you can see me scraping it. It just looks like zits popping everywhere. And unfortunately it's all rust underneath. It's cancer. It's so hard to stop. Now, salt makes water softer, which makes it penetrate. Even the micro cracks, which is, summer and winter, this frame just expands and contracts, and you're gonna develop micro cracks, and somehow this salty water makes it through and creates these rusty spots that you can see me scraping with a screwdriver. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, 3 years it was okay, but eventually, is there a way to stop that? I really don't know. You'll see later my spare wheel, which was a brand new wheel I put underneath the truck, and within 5 years of salt just corroded. So even factory paint, it was no match for it. It's just it's so hard to stop rust with any kind of paint product. As you can see, I'm just going over all the spots that basically have the zits, little bubbles where water got underneath and corroded. Now the tubes, the round tubes going in between, they looked somewhat better. There was a few spots here and there. Again, this was the same coating, three coats of chassis saver and then 2 coats of rubberized Rust-Oleum. So the outside of the tubes, I think, did pretty good. Okay, next was the axle, drive axle, the pumpkin for differential and the differential cover. That I used 3 coats of chassis saver and 3M rubberized spray, which I applied 2 coats of it, I believe. And that did about the same as the rubberized Rust-Oleum coating. I really didn't see any difference other than the cover, the pumpkin cover that you see here. It basically has no rust whatsoever after 5 years, but the axle, which was a cast iron, which was very difficult to clean all the rust and down to clean metal, the axle definitely rusted, and where the mounts are for the shocks and the mounts for the springs. Our next product was a 50-50 mixture of candle wax and lithium grease. I basically took a candle wax, I heated it on the stove, melted it, and mixed it with a grease, and then brushed it on a rusty frame. I just knocked the loose rust, kind of brushed it off. I didn't really clean it very well, and just brushed it right on. It held pretty good for 2 years. The problem with this, as soon as it got cold, the wax got too hard and was chipping away. I was driving on a lot of dirt roads with rocks kicking up, and I could see any spot a little tiny rock hit the frame, it would chip away the coating. In the wintertime, mainly because it was just too hard. The mixture 50-50 wax and grease just made this thing too brittle, and it was just chipping away, and I could see, within a couple years, I could see spots of rust popping up. Now remember, this is 5 years of not touching anything. It's easy to just go underneath and touch it up and stop all the rust, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to see what exactly happens within 5 years of not touching it. Next one was just plain lithium grease. I mainly did it on the inside cross members between frame rails and on the inside of the frame rails. plain grease brushed right over rusty metal. And this is definitely the winner. This thing, again, this is 5 years untouched. And you can see some rust spots where things just, maybe I didn't coat it really well or somehow the water penetrated. But for the most part, I mean, this held better than anything else. Now, if I spend just 5 minutes every couple years with a brush and touch it up, the spots that rust showing up, I mean, this would have just kept this truck completely rust-free. But again, I didn't want to touch anything for 5 years to really see what's going on. But definitely grease being the easiest one to apply and the easiest one to touch up. I mean, all you have to do is just once a year go with underneath your truck for 5 minutes with a brush and just touch up the spots where you see, yellow, orange rust. And you're done. No cleanup, nothing. I mean, applying grease to a frame is definitely a way to go. I've just learned that. And this is how I'm going to treat all my vehicles in the future. If I just touched it up once a year for 5 minutes, I wouldn't have no rust whatsoever on this truck. Next product is 30% wax, melted wax, and 70% lithium grease. And I use that in the front, just the front section of the frame. And that definitely did better than the midsection. You can still see some rust, and because the wax, in the wintertime would just chip away. Last winter was minus 22 degrees. So that kind of coldness just makes this wax mixture way too hard. And that's basically when you need it, in the wintertime, where it's all that salt on the roads and it's really cold. So I think mixing wax with the grease is not the way to go. It's just, it held for 5 years. You can see, I mean, it's not a bad, you have a few spots here and there, so it definitely did work. The next product was just plain chain oil. Chain oil is pretty much the thickest oil you can buy. It's very sticky, it's thicker than 2050 engine oil. And I apply this to the any rusty spot on the body and the rocker panels, and anywhere where there's a mount, like a body mount. I basically brushed it right over the rust. This is something that has to be done every year, I believe, because within a year I was just seeing rust everywhere. Within 3 years, it looked like I never applied anything. Like, I don't know what happened. The salt basically dissolved the oil that I applied, because I don't even see any greasy spot. It's like I've never did anything. And as you can see, the body is just all completely rotted. And also on the inside of the bumpers, I applied the chain oil, because there was no way to paint it, there's no way to clean them. So I just brushed on a bunch of chain oil, and that didn't do well. I mean, like I said, within a year, I saw rust everywhere on the inside of the bumpers. You can see it on the outside too. There's my dog. Yeah, see, it's just the whole bumper's going bad. Ready to fall off, basically. But I don't care about bumpers. All I care about is frame. And now this is just a walk around the whole truck. You can see the body, the frame, the bumpers, all the rust. I didn't really care about the bumpers and the body. All I cared about is the frame. And even though I didn't touch anything for 5 years, I kept looking at it, and all I got is right now is just surface rust. There's no rot, it's not going deep in there. And this frame is so thick. I got so many comments from you guys worrying about my truck being compromised. You don't get it. Today trucks, the frames are 60% thinner than this truck. My thinnest spot, which was 90,000, which was at the end of the frame, it's still twice as thick as today's frame on these trucks. That's how they make these trucks today so light. Better MPG. But I can't even imagine today's truck if they rust. There's nothing there to rust. I mean, the frames are so thin. If you get any rust, forget it. These trucks, the old trucks, especially the 2500 series, 3/4 ton trucks, the frames are super, super thick. Most of the frame was well over 1/8 of an inch thick, because I measure with a caliper everywhere all around the frame, and the frame was still 90% there. And it's still twice as thick as any new frame on the new truck today. So this is a footage from 6 years ago when I was melting candle wax and mixing it with grease. You can see this AutoZone grease. I don't think it's made anymore, because I went to buy it one time and they said they no longer make it, but STP grease is the same thing. it doesn't matter, it's a lithium grease. And then, like I said, I would just melt the candle and then mix it up.